Welcome everyone. Today we're discussing organisational development, and in particular we're going to talk about developing agile working practices. So today we're going to demonstrate some agile working practices, which I'm a little nervous about. So we're going to use different areas of Zoom and try and be super interactive. So we're joined by Rhiannon Stafford, who's an organisational development specialist from Blue Grape Talent. I think a lot of you know Rhiannon already. So it's going to be interactive. It's going to be a workshop style. We're fingers crossed everything's going to go smoothly. So feel free to ask lots of questions as we're going along in the chat box. I know we've had some questions in already, which Rhiannon's wrapped into the session. But if there's anything else that you want to ask, then pop them in there. Rhiannon and I will keep an eye on things as we go along. So without further ado, I'll pass over to the lovely Rhiannon and mute myself just in case.
Oh, thank you, Eloise. I always feel a little bit pressure now when it's like someone said such lovely things, and I'm like, oh, I do hope I live up to everybody's expectations now. But hello and welcome, and thank you everybody for taking up a bit of your time. And I do hope that what I can do this afternoon is going to be interesting. I'm going to try my best to make it interactive for you. So hopefully you're going to go away having felt that actually that was worth having an hour out of my day. I've had something worthwhile there. But today is going to be about organisational development. So a quick whistle-stop tour of what on earth does that mean, and specifically dive into how we can then use some OD techniques to help us manage organisations through change, and then specifically how do we take advantage or how can we move an organisation to be more agile and to adopt more agile ways of working. And I'm going to try to do that in the next 40 minutes. And still allow some time for you guys to have some interaction as well. So screen share first of all. And hopefully you're all now going to see a slide with some silver marbles. And I thought very easily I'd start off with what the hell is organisational development anyway? We tend to use quite a bit of nice jargon in HR. So what do I mean by OD? So it is, OD, I'd say, is underpinned by behavioural science, psychology. It's understanding why people do stuff, why they behave in the way that they do. And if we understand that, we can help them behave in a slightly different way. But as well as just understanding the behavioural science of people and why we do stuff, organisational development is also about creating alignment with goals, your organisation's goals or activities, hence the marbles there. Organisational development should be activities and approaches that are carried out in a very planned, intentional way with a view to bring about a particular change or a particular result for the overall performance of the organisation, not necessarily improving individual policies or processes for the sake of improving those processes. It's about doing stuff, I suppose, in the most generalist way that will drive an improvement or a change across all of the organisation. And to achieve that, that's why we plug into behavioural science and psychology to really understand why people do things or don't do things in the way that we want them to do. So that's a very layman's terms. Sorry, I'm a bit of a Welsh farmer. What the hell is OD in the first place? That's kind of what I mean when I talk about organisational development. Specifically today, if I can get us to move forward a slide, and I need to just move you up there. Specifically today, there's two things, and hopefully you'll see some of the words, your own words up here that you sent through to Eloise. Two topics for us to focus on under the banner of OD: managing change, which is probably a massive part of organisational development, really. And then how can we take the concepts of managing change and to try to create more of an agile working environment? These seem to be the most frequently occurring topics and things that are in our minds right now. So I'm going to hopefully give you something of interest and something that you can use and go away with. So managing change and agile working. But I'm going to start off with looking first of all at managing change. And if you don't mind indulging me for a minute, I went back to in my history of when I first started to work within OD. When we talked about managing change, there was a quite a particular approach that everybody kind of said to me was the right way of doing change. And this might look a bit familiar to people. It's about finding that burning platform. Has anybody heard about that phrase before? You know, we need to find a burning platform to drive people to change. But the burning platform traditionally has kind of been a subliminal message of, if we don't do something, you know, if we don't change, then something awful is going to happen. And where that kind of comes from is, if you think of this concept of being stuck on a burning platform out at sea, maybe, you know, an oil platform that's on fire. The idea of creating a burning platform is to create a sense of urgency for people to make a move or to make a change. So your oil platform is on fire out at sea. You need to create a sense of urgency for you to save yourself. So that urgency is so great that you take action, and that action is to jump off, you know, do something that might be really, really scary. We talk about to make effective change, to drive effective change, we've got to create that burning platform. And that really does work, because it, to an extent, because it prompts someone to take immediate action that might be, you know, particularly scary, rather than the consequences of staying where you are. It's not too positive. And I think today, what's our burning platform for today? If we're not saying coronavirus or business recovery from coronavirus or restructuring because of coronavirus, that's probably today's, you know, big burning platform. But how well does that work? I'll come back to that. But if I carry on with my almost kind of history lesson, once we've established a burning platform, what was the next stage then of managing people through change? Well, it then came down to this communication. We proceeded to tell people very logically what would happen, when it was going to happen, and what they needed to do. And we got stuck in this concept of giving you the information just in time. Let's not tell people too much until they need to know about that. Well, that sounds very logical and very planned and very systematic, but most real world problems, let's face it, especially at work, tend to be pretty complex, that don't really have any pre-existing logical or easy answer. So by drip feeding communication, when we told people what was going to happen when we thought they needed it, actually didn't really help too well. Because if you think about it, when you don't know what's on the other side of this change, often you don't want to make that jump. So you've got this burning platform on fire behind you. And it's amazing how much our brains will keep us in this known state, even if it is a burning platform, because we know it. We know that where we are, we're familiar with it, we know where we fit in. Why would we want to make that scary leap into that freezing cold ocean when we don't know what's going to happen? So kind of what happened with this approach to managing change, burning platform communication when we needed to, was, thanks very much, guys. I'll stay on this platform. At least I know what fire's all about. That concept of better the devil you know. But what we know these days, the more we learn about neuroscience, the more we understand now why our traditional thinking about change may not have worked very well for us. So there's my kind of historical experience, and I suppose the reason why I've kind of managing people and organisations through change. And so I wanted to share with you this model to start off with. Now, as I talk you through this model, I'm going to ask you to pop a couple of things in the chat function in a minute or two. And I'm going to ask you to think about elements of this model that you can particularly relate to, that you think are, oh my gosh, that is absolutely me. Now, I'll remind you when to do that bit in the chat function in just a few minutes. But here's the first model. It's called the SCARF model, and it's developed by Dr. David Rock, and he's a neuroscientist, and he founded the Neuro Leadership Institute. So he's a neuroscientist that basically works within leadership development now. So there's, and from his research, he was able to research around our brains and how we react to situations. He was able to capture his research in this really helpful model called the SCARF model. 3 things that underpin this model, though. He found that the brain treats what he calls social threats and social rewards with the same intensity as physical threats and physical rewards. So The way our brain responds if we're physically threatened is exactly the same way that we respond if we feel threatened in a social environment. And when we feel threatened, our capacity to make decisions or to solve problems, to collaborate, logical thinking, it kind of all flies out the window. When we're under pressure or feeling threatened, our ability to think rationally is greatly reduced. And when we're in a reward situation, as he calls it, the opposite of a threat, then those abilities shoot right up. And the threat response is more intense and more common because our brains are basically hardwired to always look for something threatening. So as we're sitting here right now, our brains are whirring away. And yes, I mean, Ellen Rees and I joked about, oh, hope this doesn't go wrong. What if nobody turns up? And what if I can't? We're looking for the things that could go wrong or could threaten us. We're never looking for the things that could go right because our brain is designed that way. It sounds quite depressing, really, but it's what's kept us alive for millions and millions of years. So there's the start of his model, and he was able to capture what he calls social domains and group them into 5 areas. And this is where the name SCARF comes from. So very quickly, what are these 5 social domains? And these are the social domains. When I go through these, it will be great if you could pop into the chat function, which, if any of these domains can you kind of relate to. It might be 1 or 2, it might be all of them. There are certain ones that I now understand, oh my God, that's so important to me. And I can now see how and why I've behaved in particular ways in the past. So our first social domain, the first part of our life that's really important to us is about our status. And status feels a bit, but status is about how we see each other in relation to other people. We all without realizing it, when we meet people, we assign people into a particular pecking order, where some people we look up to, some people we look down to, we think we position ourselves somewhere. So maintaining our status is really important to us. And if something happens to us that potentially knocks our status, or our perception that our status is knocked, that can cause our brains to respond in a threat way. The next area is certainty, being able to predict the future. None of us really know what's going to happen, but being able to have some certainty around what is going to happen in our future is extremely important to us. And I think we're all feeling this now, maybe with the pandemic, where we laugh and we joke to an extent, but we don't know what's going to happen from one day to the next. Are we going to be locked down? Are we not? Our sense of certainty and our ability to predict elements of our future is very, very low at the moment. Autonomy is also another thing that we need. And if we don't have autonomy, so the ability to have a sense of control over events that affect our life, without autonomy, we can also find that particularly threatening. Relatedness is the next domain, which is about us feeling a sense of safety with other people. We all have maybe experienced, oh, how nice it's been to be back in the office and to be with people that we know. We are naturally designed to live within tribes, and the tribes that we choose to live in look, sound and feel like us. They feel safe. So we need to be amongst people who look and sound similar to us for us to feel safe. And then the last domain there is about fairness, our perception that what is happening around us is that we've been given a fair deal. And what this model says to us is we can feel threatened. And when our brain feels threatened, it feels threat in the same way as somebody physically threatening you, put you against the wall having a fight. These things can trigger exactly the same response in our brain as a physical threat does. So do any of those 5 areas resonate more or less?
Nice.
Oh, somebody said something there.
Oh, I think that was me. I was muttering to myself. I thought I was on mute. Sorry.
That's quite all right. Did you say fairness?
Yes, autonomy and fairness would be definitely my 2. So sorry.
No, that's perfectly fine. That's perfect. What happens if you don't have autonomy, or you don't feel that you've been treated fairly?
I'm not sure actually how I feel. I just feel, I guess I feel a bit put out if I don't, because I would treat somebody else fairly. So I feel that that's what I would do to somebody else. So I would expect that in return.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I get what you're saying there. And thank you for being brave and coming off mute and saying that.
That's right.
Now, I'll just have a little look at the chat. So what else have we got? We've got autonomy. We've got relatedness, so with people, autonomy, certainty. Oh, we got fairness coming up again. More fairness. Oh, all of them. Certainty, fairness. Oh, there's a real common theme going on. Is it an HR population where fairness is really important to us? But certainty is coming up quite a bit more. Oh, and what have we got there, Sarah? Certainty, more so as I like to reassure people in my role. And it's just not always possible currently. Absolutely. And that's really interesting what you say there, Sarah. So you're quite naturally, as a human being, you are looking at the world through your frame of reference. Certainty is really important for me. So what you do is try to reassure people in your role. So that's also another interesting thing for us to observe, is if there's a particular one of these social domains that's more important to us, we are more likely to kind of translate that into our actions, and so our actions at work. So if for an example, you think status, that's absolutely not important to me, then actually you might not be spotting people who do feel that status is really important to them. I know that status and autonomy are probably my two big ones. I absolutely like to be in control. It's probably why I work for myself now, and I'm not very good at being an employee. But I'm actually pretty proud of the fact I'm a professional. And I did find within my corporate world that sometimes, it's just HR, it's not professional. Now, actually, don't knock my status here. I've got a really important piece of information. I can really contribute well here. So those two things, I can look back on my life and think, yeah, that's really influenced my behaviour. And it's really influenced the things that have acted me off, if I'm quite honest. Now, what have we else we got? But there you go, Natasha, you're comfortable without certainty. And do you know what? I wish I had a bit more of that. Accepting what you cannot control is key.
Yeah, I think that, and that's what I've had to talk to a lot of my employees about, is as particularly now, is accepting the things that are without, out of your control, and just focusing on the things that you can control and change. Because otherwise, there's no, exactly. You can't win.
But can we see that everybody has had something slightly different here? And already we've got some people saying, well, and this is how I deal with that, or this is how I help other people deal with that. Imagine in a period of change, organizational change, how many of those social domains could be knocked? Certainty, autonomy, status, if suddenly you're being downgraded and moved to a different job, relatedness, people might be leaving. This is the kind of stuff that holds people back and stops them from changing. So the whole concept of creating a burning platform, well, for a start, we're activating the whole threat. That's really dangerous, a burning platform. It's what, if you don't change, something bad will happen. That doesn't create a very rewarding environment, and it's more likely to knock some of these social domains. So our whole approach to managing change previously, but a bit cack-handed, to be quite honest. So there's the first model I wanted to share with you around, if we want people to feel brave to make a change, to make a leap, the first thing we've got to understand is some of the things that from our brain's perspective could be holding us back, and some of the traditional things that we have done within HR and in organizations actually is working against effective change management. But the next model I wanted to kind of share with you is also similar, but also I suppose quite different, because the next big thing that we used to do with change management was this communications plan, wasn't it? And we'd create a big organizational wide communications plan, and we'd agree what people needed to know at what point in time, and we would tell them. And genuinely, we would do our best to tell them clearly and logically, because that makes sense, doesn't it? We've got to be clear, we've got to be logical. But now the more we understand again about how our brain actually works, some of this logical telling approach is really going against the grain. And this is what I mean by here, because when you try to change someone's thinking and behavior through the way you communicate and interact with them, there's potentially three little areas or kind of memories within the brain that we can access. First one to look at is cognitive memory. And that's the cognitive memory, that's your rational thinking, short-term memory, which is really good at problem solving and dealing with things immediately, but it's actually pretty poor at learning and long-term learning, because our attention spans are really quite short. And actually what we now know, and if we rely on the rational thinking cognitive part of our brain too much, because it doesn't deal with lots of information very well, it can distort what we recall, and it can selectively remember parts and selectively forget it. So if we're just communicating with this cognitive rational thinking part of our brain, we're not really doing very much to help long-term learning and behavioural change. Then the other end of the spectrum is this fear-based memory. Now, learning can occur here, but fear-based learning, it's coded as your survival response. So it's the things that when it goes in your brain, you do not forget that, because if I don't do that, something bad is going to happen. I had a great example of this yesterday when my daughter came home from school having had a bad day. She said, the first thing this new teacher said to me was, take your earphones out, otherwise I'll confiscate your phone. Fear-based learning. So that's absolutely not going to, it's not going to stick for the right reasons, because when we learn something through fear, it absolutely does stick. But then when we're faced with something similar, a similar situation in the future, even if the circumstances have changed slightly, people will get stuck with that. No, I have to keep doing this, because if I don't do this, something bad is going to happen. And that's when we start to see resistance to change, because the behavior, the original behavior, was learned through fear. So that's actually not good either to help us change organizations, become more agile. The bit of the memory in the brain we want to try to access here is this insight-based memory. This is where your long-term memories form and where they're kept. And this is where learning is really effective. Because what happens in the long term, we're pattern storing animals. We don't remember everything, but we remember patterns in our brains. And by accessing that part of your brain, we can help people kind of reshape the patterns in their brain, change the stories. And it's those stories that influence how we think, how we view the world, how we see the world. And learning here quite literally involves changing parts of your brain, the neuron connections in your brain, reordering the bits of information so that they make more sense. And this is where people are connecting the information, and we get the aha moments when you suddenly think, oh my God, that now makes sense. What you've done is recreate a pattern in your brain. You create new truths, new views of the world. Has anyone, oh, I'm sure you have, but do you suddenly have a flash of kind of inspiration when you least expect it, when you think, oh, that's what I can do, that's how I can solve the problem, that's the best thing to do? I think I saw Sue kind of nodding a little bit there. Unfortunately, my inspirations come like in the shower in the morning. It's like, oh, I could do that for the webinar, that would make more sense. But then what happens is when you have those flashes of inspiration, you are hugely motivated to put that into practice. Your behavior does change. And that's the kind of behavior, of response that we want to try to tap into within organizational change now. Because it's that people coming to their own conclusions around, now this is the right way to do things. This is how I can do it. And that behavior sticks. Dopamine is released in the brain. Dopamine is connected with action and energy. They go out and they do something. And that's what you want. You want to see a behavioral change. So encouraging people to have that insight moment and to create their own versions of, oh, that's what we need to do. It doesn't involve telling them what to do in the right time or the right place. It kind of pushes to the background all of our traditional thinking about change being rational and logical. It isn't. It's full of emotions and it's full of neurons in the brain. So there's a very quick kind of overview. So if there's two things there, What stops people from change? What do they find threatening and rewarding? How can we get people interested and engaged? You know, how could we put these kind of things into practice? So a couple of things here. I'm going to have to move your pictures down there because I can't see what's on my slides. So if we're thinking about going through organisational change, first of all, let's think about that SCARF model, the domains. Consider how your communications or your actions could potentially be seen or felt as threats or rewards. How are you creating that new reward state? Forget the burning platform. What's this wonderful, new, bright, exciting, refreshing place that you want people to move towards? That's what's more motivating. Psychologists now, we now understand that although fear drives a quick and immediate response, it's not motivating in the long term. What is motivating in the long term is wanting to move to that rewarding state. Communication plans I used to draw up were big, kind of organisational wide, all coming centrally with lots of information. Our communication plans need to be far more local, based on individual conversations that encourage reflection, inquiry, all the kind of skills that we want to see in our leaders from a coaching perspective. Coaching skills are absolutely critical here. Asking questions, helping other people have insights rather than telling them. Empathy is not sympathy, it's not judgment. Consultations where you genuinely listen and show people empathy, that reduces a lot of the threat and increases a reward state. Can we think about new working arrangements that provide a framework but allow for autonomy to make decisions on the details? So a kind of as long as you stay within this box, how you operate within this box is okay. That gives people the autonomy to still make their own decisions. But what we do know is really important for insights is that people have space, time and quiet to mull over things and problems and issues or things that they're told. So try not to rush any consultations. You won't change behaviour quickly. It does take a long time. And then as I was pulling this together, it kind of reminded me also of our last session with Graham, and what Graham talked an awful lot there about was trust. So absolutely, for behaviour change and organisational change to be really effective, it's got to be built on a trust in that employment relationship. So it's not just a good to have because that's the right thing to do to get the best out of people. If we want to change our organisations, if we don't start from that trusting base, it makes everything else extremely difficult. So there's a bit kind of theoretical, I suppose, at the moment. I'm just going to pause for a minute, and I can see there's a couple of extra things in the chat box I haven't quite looked at yet. We've got Helena. If I can't solve a problem, I usually leave it and go off and do something else. Absolutely. That is the best way to get these insight moments, is, funnily enough, not think long and hard about a problem. Think about it, park it, go away and do something else. I go and do my garden.
I think that's why, like you, Rhiannon, my stuff comes in the shower because I'm thinking of dinner and what I'm going to make or something completely different.
Yeah. Absolutely. Because the more you keep going, and again, so the more you keep trying to solve a problem, the less likely you are to have an insight. And as bizarre as it sounds, so leave people to think about things, talk to them, listen to them, explain what's happening, hear their point of view, and then let them go. So, and it seems a bit wrong because we keep getting told with our comms plans we should be communicating and telling. Actually, sometimes not saying anything is a really good thing to do as well. Or just check in with how are you feeling? What does that mean? And we never are taught, well, I was never taught in my HR career to have a consultation meeting without an agenda. But actually a consultation meeting just could be, well, we've explained to you what the changes are. Have you had a chance to think about it? Mull it over. What are your thoughts now? What do you think about? Just having that conversation, it can really help people have their own insight moments. And then Terence, not giving up on trying to create justice is important to me. Oh, Terence, what do you mean by that? Have I lost you?
Can you hear me?
Got you now, Terence. Not giving up on trying to create justice.
Well, I hate injustice. that's the main reason why. And I've worked in a lot of spaces with communities as well as in education, where that has been an important concern for me. And just in my personal life, just again, hating injustice.
Got you. So fairness is a really important domain for you then. Yeah. And that's interesting what you say, because it's based on your prior experience. Absolutely. Now, I'm just doing a time check. I'm not doing very well on time today. So we'll skip a couple of slides. So that's a brief kind of positioning for how can we make change work. Now, let's take that into Agile and Agile working. So, because I think trying to create an organization and become more agile, isn't that just about organizational change as well? So let's think about those two models, because two is enough to start off with. Think about those two models. How can we bring those into trying to create a more of an agile working environment? Now, I appreciate we haven't got time to go into all this detail today, but agile can mean such different things for different people and different individuals. It could be about the time, the role, the location. Agile working is really about empowering staff to make better decisions about where they want to work and how they want to work. My first question back to you, if you were saying, right, how do I move to being a more of an agile working organization, is do you first have a common definition? What the hell do you mean by agile working? There's your reward state. So step number one, how do you articulate what that reward state is or will be for people? Because without a reward state, people are going to go and put 2 and 2 together. And here you've got a square peg going into a round hole. If people don't really understand what you mean by agile working, and then everything that you currently do in an organization feels at odds with it, it's sure as hell going to trigger some of those social threat domains. So getting really clear, not just you, but your whole leadership team. If we want to be an agile working organization, what the hell is it? Working from home, working remotely, working across the country, being able to choose, what is it? We've got to be really, really clear, because once we know what it is, we can then start to think about, if this is what we're trying to achieve, what are all of the people, processes, activities, policies that I need to get all aligned from an OD perspective to be speaking the same truth and the same language. And the really frustrating thing about us within HR is maybe half of these things that I've just done as a bit of a brainstorm that's on this slide might not be within your control. So again, back to how do I create an agile working environment? Know what agile working is right from the start, and really understand what are the numerous different things that might be affected other than just working from home policy. It's going to affect the whole shebang and all different parts of the employment relationship here. And some of these things, it might not be within your gift. Financial regulations, if people are going to be working remotely, will they suddenly need to have greater autonomy over how they spend money and budgets because they can't physically get into the office to speak to other people? If these things don't line up, then we're potentially not being clear on what our reward state is. So it might not feel like a lovely, warm, cuddly kitten because we can't describe it. And because of that, all of these social domains at the bottom are being knocked because it now doesn't seem to make sense. You want me to do X, but I can't because that will affect my ability for career progression. I can't do X because I haven't got the autonomy. That doesn't feel fair. And then before we realize that everything we're trying to do appears like this really scary lion that's holding people back there. Hopefully you're all going to see a whiteboard now, and I'm just going to give you free for all. You can do it individually or as a representative of your group. Just jot down 1 or 2 things that were particularly pertinent to you. And it could be a, oh my God, I learned that moment, or I really need people to know that. Just share a little bit of your discussion within your smaller groups by writing it directly onto the flip chart here on our whiteboard. Giving autonomy to people resistant to change. Oh, hang on, I've got to get my little select tool. The value of understanding that others have different scarf priorities. Absolutely, yes. And that point there around giving autonomy, if you can't, there's an idea about balancing. if you know that one of the social domains is completely knocked, maybe status, someone's losing their job or being downgraded, what can I do with the other domains to kind of bring those up? So how much more autonomy can I give if the status has been knocked? Something like that. So there's a whole balancing idea as well. Any more for any more? There's always a delay, isn't there? Hurdle, giving autonomy to those who just want to be told what to do. Yeah, yeah. So then I have to ask the question, why bother giving them autonomy? Which sounds a little bit harsh, but if autonomy is not important to them, do you have to give them autonomy? Oh, I've got a couple there, I think. Right. Having the time to think about your comms strategy. Oh, God, yes. Thinking is hugely important. Time is really important. Yes, and involving people in change early so it can cover many elements of SCARF. That's a really good one. And building on that is, how can you help your managers know their individuals a bit better so they may be able to say, oh, Rhiannon, it's autonomy. Just don't take away her autonomy. You know, I can cope with potentially helping her move to a different job, but bloody hell, we've got to give her autonomy. How can you help your managers know that? Because we in HR, we don't know all of these people in our organisation. And then we discussed the skill set of the people in a changing organisation, particularly for people working from home, as it's a different mindset that's needed. Any thoughts on what that mindset, the difference in the mindset might be? If you started to have that thought, that might be helpful to jot some of your ideas down. What is the kind of mindset you want to develop in someone that works from home then? Have we got any other notes going up?
When my people are working from home, Rhiannon, I find that I tend them to be I need people to be much more self-reliant and be able to think for themselves and be able to drive themselves personally rather than being uplifted by a team or by a manager that's there constantly.
Yeah, self-reliant, self-driven. Yeah. Maybe it's identify their own priorities.
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of people, you know, if we're all working remotely, or a lot more people are working remotely, even though you probably still have your you know, a morning comms meeting or buzz sessions or whatever you're doing, majority of the time people are either alone or just connected by being part of teams. So yeah, definitely being I think people need to be a lot more resilient than they used to be.
That's a completely different skill set that we might have hired them for, isn't it?
Absolutely, absolutely.
And that's a different webinar. But yeah, absolutely right. So so again, now we're thinking about, if these are the type of skills that we need, what can we do to avoid people feeling threatened or in a threat state, by knowing how people could react with the SCARF domain. Because if we want people to develop new skills or try something different, if they're feeling threatened, there's no way. Threat state, your rational thinking, logical thinking shuts down. You're not collaborative, you're not innovative, you're not creative. And quite often, dare I say, it's because some of the way we have traditionally managed performance has actually created a really vicious cycle, because we're making people feel under threat. We're maybe taking away some of their autonomy, which drives their performance down even further. I think the more and more we learn about neuroscience, the more we are starting to question some of the more traditional approaches to managing people. Well, I will have a copy of this whiteboard. So you don't have to, or if you want to, you can take a screen grab now, but we'll take a copy of this so it's not lost. I think Eloise, we're recording, so it'll record, it'll keep that whiteboard automatically as well. Got one last little thing to look at the chat. Oh, yeah, okay, no problem, Danielle, you need to leave. But yes, and we're on the hour. So kind of all I wanted to say was I hope this is just giving you a really quick insight into maybe why some of our traditional approaches to change might not be working. And now the more we're starting to learn about neuroscience, maybe we need to think about change differently and think about moving to agile working, just like organizational change. And no amount of telling people and telling them rationally what's going to happen is not necessarily going to make that change successful. We've kind of got to go back and relearn the way we would manage organizations through change. I'll be honest, I am easily persuaded by a cup of tea and a slice of cake. I think, Eloise, you probably know, I do like meeting and chatting to people. I'm more than happy face-to-face or over the phone, online, whatever. If you'd like just to chat some more about what your organization is trying to do and what might be some of your hurdles, I'll happily have a chat. As I said, I'm easy persuaded with a cup of tea and a slice of cake, but even without a cake, I'll still happily come and have a chat. So thank you, Eloise, for letting me speak today, and I hope this has been of some benefit to people. I'll give Eloise the slides and the whiteboard here. Otherwise, I'm going to hand back to you then, Eloise.
Yeah, no, that was great, Rhiannon. Thank you so much for for making things so interactive. And